Do you want ideas for getting the most out of your Spellbinders September 2022 card kit? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have the Spellbinders September 2022 card kit of the month and also the embossing folder of the month. The card kit is called So Happy, and I don't know if the embossing folders have names, but there you can see it. It has these leaf images and acorns. It's a little bit of like a sort of fall look, but I also think just because it has a nature motif, it goes really well with everything. And what I'm going to do today is for half of the cards that I make, I'm going to emboss the background of them. So I'm going to emboss the card front, and I just wanted to do that because I know that when I work with my paper busting templates, sometimes there's a lot of white space, and not everybody likes to have a lot of white space on their card. I don't mind it, but my favorite thing to do to fill that white space is just to emboss the card front. So that's what I'm doing today. I love that the Spellbinders embossing folders are large enough that you can emboss an A2, a slimline, a 5x7 card front, and I have picked out 5 different paper busting templates, and then I'm going to match up some of the paper from the card kit with them. So I'm thinking about like what orientation the paper busting template is, and usually a paper busting template takes one piece of 6x6 paper and makes between 2 and 4 A2 size cards with no scraps, and I do add cardstock to them for mats. And so you'll see all of that process. And this way of making cards, which this whole video and this process is going to result in 38 cards from the kit. But there is so many more cards you can make with the kit. The kit comes with 10 card bases, so I'm going to be adding some extra cardstock. There is also 9 sheets of colored or other cardstock, and I'll add that, but you can make so much with just the contents of this kit, particularly because there is a stamp and die set. I am thinking about what size my end result pieces are going to be too. One of the sketches that I picked, which is number 32, uses these little 1.5 by 1.5 inch squares, and so I want to make sure that if I cut down a paper to 1.5 inch square, it's still going to look good. And so that's why I was holding up my fingers there. And those are the kind of decisions that I'm processing through. I'm also deciding, that sketch makes 4 cards with one piece of 6x6 paper. So I'm only going to use 2 pieces of pattern paper with that one. And all of my pieces will be the same pattern because this is single-sided paper. Whereas other sketches, they maybe only make 2 cards, and so I'm going to take 4 pieces of pattern paper. In the paper pad that comes with the kit, there are 2 of each design, and I am going to, if there are 2 sheets of a design, I'm going to use both sheets. So with that in mind, if it makes 4 cards and I use 2 sheets, it's going to make 8 cards, etc. Here's where I use the embossing folder. Basically, if you tuck the card, an A2 size card, into the end, it will emboss the whole front of the card. And so I typically put the card front in, and I put it just a little bit over the score line so that I can make sure the entire front is embossed. But if you don't like a little bit of extra embossing on the back, you'll just want to line it up a bit more precisely with the score line. I, if at all possible, tend to try and pick the same color of cardstock when I make large sets of cards like these. So since I'm going to be doing so much card making at one time, and I think this process is great for if you like to donate your cards, because you can make a lot to send out. It's great if you are trying to make a batch of cards for like a particular occasion. You need a bunch of thank you cards or Christmas cards. This kind of process can be really helpful. And you see that I'm tucking all of them into these plastic envelopes, and that helps me to keep everything organized because when I've picked out the pattern paper, I've put it in that envelope. Then I picked out the cardstock, I put it in that envelope so that all of my pieces are staying together. When I was prepping the process, I did put 1 sheet of cardstock per every 2 cards that I thought I was going to make. And actually, sorry, I did 1 piece of cardstock per piece of pattern paper is how I think I did it. But that was more cardstock than I needed. But I like to put in more than I think I will need, and then I go through and I start with the cardstock that is in the first envelope, and I cut all of the mats that I will need. So if I'm working on No Scrap template number 2 and it's calling for 3 1/4 by 2 3/4 mats, I'm going to cut all of those, and I'm going to keep track of it because you see I had those sticky notes. I totally understand that this process is a lot less organic than some people might prefer. Some people don't like to do all of this advanced planning. They really like to just kind of experiment and play, and that can be super fun, and I do that sometimes too. I will take hours to Copic color a card, and then sometimes I will make 40 cards in a day, and it's all for like what, is that you like at that time, and I find both relaxing in different ways. Here I am cutting 2 pieces of cardstock at the same time. This is like 110-pound cardstock. I will say if you particularly like your measurements to be really, really exact, I would not cut 2 pieces of cardstock at the same time. With a guillotine trimmer in particular, but I bet it would be the same for any kind of trimmer. So if you cut the 2 pieces at one time, you're going to get a little bit more shifting. I also cut 4 pieces of Spellbinders 6x6 paper at the same time because it's a little bit thinner paper, which is great because then I can cut a whole bunch of it at one time, and it doesn't add a lot of bulk to the cards, but it's super pretty, the foiling detail and all of that. So I also, when I cut with 2 sheets at one time of the cardstock, it's not very accurate. The pattern paper, because it's on the thinner side, you can cut at least 2 pieces without any problem. And I wanted to show you the process of also me, like I keep track of everything. So on that sticky note, I knew I was going to make 8 cards, and I was using 2 pieces of pattern paper, and each pattern paper piece got cut into 16 little squares. And so then I would have 32 squares, and I needed 32 mats. And I wrote all of that stuff down on the sticky note so that I could keep track of it, and it's just attached to the envelope. You can even put it inside if that's a little bit easier for you. I have heard that some people like to use like sheet protectors. I think that could work great, but they can't hold quite as much bulk, and I did wind up with a lot of cardstock scraps at the end. I tried to be really careful. There were a couple of times where the cardstock worked out that like a scrap piece cut the new card, the new mats for the next card really easily. But then, of course, there inevitably are some small little cardstock scraps. That's okay. I'm going to use them for fake foam tape. I'm going to use them to prop up and support different elements on my cards. This final step of the process is not something you need to do, but I do sometimes like to include it because I think there are people out there that are a little bit curious about how these videos get made. And so as part of my process, I, cut everything for the 6 to 8 cards that I'm making, but I only record making one of them. And then I record one for a reel. So I take all of the pieces that I need for YouTube and Instagram for the reel, and I put them in little baggies so that I don't accidentally assemble them, because what I'm going to do off camera is I have 8 cards. I'm going to assemble 6 of them off camera, and then one on camera for the reel and one on camera for the YouTube. So I need to keep track of all that stuff. And I think sometimes it's interesting to see the process if you've ever considered making videos, like what all goes into it. All right, I'm working on my first card. So this is a set of 8 cards. It's using paper busting template number 2. This one is super, super easy. It makes cards really, really fast, and you can use a whole variety of things. You see there that I used a little piece of cardstock to prop up the sentiment panel, and I did stamp directly on the panel. But if you like your words to stand out a little bit more, or if you don't like the look of stamping on pattern paper, you could certainly stamp it on cardstock and cut it out and stretch it across there. But what I'm going to try to do in this video is every time that I go to embellish a set of cards, I'm going to try to use some slightly different things from the card kit, because the advantage of having this amazing card kit is that you have a lot of choices for embellishments, and you can make these really unique looking cards, because not only are there I think there's 40 pieces of pattern paper, which means that there are 20 patterns. So you have all of those, but then you have all of these die cuts and the stamps, the die set that goes with it. And if you want just a deeper look at the kit, I do have a video just dedicated to showing you the contents of the kit, so you can see that more clearly, and I don't have to add that to this video and make it even longer, because this is kind of a long way, but I do really like to show you the whole process. So this is paper busting template number 5. It also makes 2 cards, but then I'm going to make 8 in all because I use 2 pieces of pattern paper, or 2 designs of pattern paper and 4 sheets. This is where I'm going to pull in those chipboard embroidery hoops. I knew I really wanted to use those because those were one of the bigger, bulkier things about the kit. I wasn't at this point so much concerned oh, am I getting enough use out of the die set? Because the way I figure it, the die set, it's just kind of when I'm done with making a stack of cards from the kit, I'll then probably disperse it into my collection. And the die set's going to be there, and I'm going to use the flowers in it, and you can cut an embroidery hoop in the die set. That's going to be there forever. But these would be a little bit bulkier to store, so I said, let me take advantage. And they're obviously a lot faster to use than die cutting the embroidery hoops. Although the die set that comes in the kit, Spellbinders does this a lot, and it's one of the things that I think is really awesome about their die sets is there's a couple of things that all should be cut out of the same piece of cardstock or pattern paper, whatever you're going to do. So all of the pieces that would be metal, I don't know what the screw on the top of the embroidery hoop is called, but the screw, and it's probably just called a screw. There might be a special name, I don't know. And the needle are all one die, so that you can quickly cut it all out of a silver cardstock, or the little leaves will all be attached because you're probably all going to cut them out of green or something like that. And it saves you a lot of time and results in a lot less lost teeny tiny dies. This one is paper busting template number 38. It does call for you to cut a circle out of that little 2x2 square. I opted not to do that for this one because I knew there would so clearly be that would be a spot for an embellishment. And because it makes 3 cards from one sheet of 6x6 paper, I decided to just use one piece of paper. And so all of my sketches can be used with a single sheet of paper, but just know that all the little pieces are going to be the same color or same pattern. So as you saw in some of them, I was mixing up the pattern because I pulled in 2 pattern papers and made more cards. And I totally could have done that here. But some sketches work really well, even with single-sided paper and having the 2 pieces be the same pattern. And I think this is a good example of that. So I wanted to mix it up and show you different approaches. Also, this is one of the ones that I think really benefits from having that embossed background. This has a little bit more white space because one piece of paper is making 3 cards, so there's not a lot of paper on any particular card. And therefore, there's a little bit more white space than on some others, and so you have a little bit more of that embossing folder showing through. If you really like to make simple pattern paper cards, or you find yourself using my sketches a lot, I really cannot recommend enough trying with whatever embossing folders you have, just adding that little detail in the background. And the Spellbinders kit is a great way to get new, beautiful embossing folders. And there's so many ideas out there for them. Okay, this one is paper busting template number 24. It makes 2 cards, so I did choose 2 pieces of pattern paper for this one. And you can mix it up because there's the stripe in the back, there's the big focal point square, and then there's this little odd piece of paper that gets kind of just left over. And if you don't like that little flag that's sticking out of the bottom of the square, take that piece of pattern paper and put it on the inside of the card as a little bit of extra embellishment there. or use it like I am here as this little flag detail and then decide which pattern you want it to match. Like, should it be the same as the square or should it be the same as the stripe? Again, this one you could totally do out of one sheet and everything could be the same pattern, but with all them being kind of layered on top of each other, I think it can be nice to have an extra pattern. So here are the chipboard stickers from the set. There are chipboard stickers. There were like plain flat stickers that were actually made of more of a cardstock material. They are not paper stickers. They have a little bit more heft to them, which was nice. And then the hoops are kind of similar to these in terms of being chipboard, and they were sticky on the back. So a lot of this has its adhesive already attached to it, which makes it really fast. The die cuts do not, and I've used the die cuts and will continue to use them. This is actually the last set of cards. This is paper busting template number 32, and I'll be pulling in the die cuts again. Those you do have to add adhesive to, and there is adhesive included in the kit, which can help you to pop things up and add dimension because there's foam and plain adhesive. But I certainly just tend to bring in the adhesive I have in my stash. And for foam tape, I will often take those scraps of cardstock. I'll glue them like 2 scraps of cardstock together, and I'll use that behind my images, because even with the included foam tape, which again, I love that they include so much stuff, including adhesive, because you then really could just like take this card kit and a paper trimmer and make 10 cards before even adding anything else, because there's that adhesive, because there's those card bases and the envelopes. But then, pull it into your stash and go ahead and make a whole bunch more with all the stuff you already have on hand. But so convenient to have that sort of like, oh, we're going on a trip, what could I do? If you want, like, if you have some extra downtime in your trip, or crafting's the way we relax, so we want to do it probably even when we're on the go. Just snag the whole kit. Here, especially when I was trying to put some of the die cuts layered on top of the chipboard hoops, because there was 3 little hoops. I used 8 of the large hoops in a previous design, but again, because these were a little bit bulkier, I wanted to get them used. I layered die cuts in the center of them, and it was more important to pop those up. So I took a little bit of the double layered cardstock and I put it behind them. But because these die cuts are like a thin cardstock, you certainly would need to give them a little something. And I think in general, adding foam tape or some dimension behind die cuts in these situations can do a lot for making them stand out a bit more. On the same note, something that would help things to stand out a bit more is there were the stickers that had a lot of the sentiments in them. And I wanted to use those because, again, I wanted to show you, like, okay, how would I use the stickers? How would I use the die cuts, etc.? Like, how would I use all the different things in the kit? So if I were to take these and stick them directly to the card, they wouldn't stand out very much. And if I were to try to stick them on the embossed card backgrounds, they'd be kind of bumpy with the embossing. So I just used, again, those scraps of cardstock and used it to mat my sentiment stickers as well. And I wanted to show you that because there's just like so many ways you can use leftover cardstock. I have a hard time using leftover scraps of pattern paper, which is why I have 100 or more, probably at this point, templates on jesscrafts.com that show you how to use pattern paper without making any scraps, because I don't like having pattern paper scraps. Cardstock scraps I can use all day. So that, I showed you 5 card designs, but there was 6 to 8 of each card, and I will briefly show you them here. But there's also a coordinating blog post where you can scroll through and see what they look like with the embossing or without. And as you can see, there is so much left in my kit. I made 38 cards today. The last Spellbinders kit, I made 50, and in both cases, there was just so much pattern paper and other embellishments left. If you are on a budget and you can only buy like one thing each month, this would be the thing to buy, because you will be able to craft all month long with it. If you like this video, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Give me a thumbs up and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next templater tutorial. Check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.